Could you be in a relationship with a covert narcissist? What's the differences between that type of subtype of narcissism and the more typical one like the grandiose? Well, in this episode, Tara and I are going to dive into the particularly challenging dynamics of this toxic relationship. And the self-help tip is how to help someone that you know and love who's threatening to harm themselves. Thank you for joining us on Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. I'm Dr. Kerry McAvoy, a mental health specialist with over 20 years of counseling experience.
And I'm Tara Blair Ball, a certified relationship coach.
This is a listener-supported podcast. Please consider becoming a supporter of the show for less than a cup of coffee. You can see a link in the show notes below. One of the most frustrating relationships, probably even one of the more dangerous, at least from the sense of emotional well-being, is having a connection or a relationship with a covert narcissist. I would love to know if you've had experience with that and how did it go? I recently have been thinking back about one of my friendships that I had. It was a friendship that I had just prior to meeting my narcissistic ex. And as it devolved, it got really bad. I mean, this individual started to become even suicidal, threatening to harm themselves when I was suggested I might relocate to another part of the country. And it was a disaster, meltdown, threats. Didn't I ever love this person? How could I ever think of doing this to this person after all this person had done for me, seeing me through my late husband's battle with cancer? I mean, the guilt this person piled onto me was so enormously high. And this is something I hear that a lot of our listeners report that they've struggled with, and certainly on social media, is that covert narcissists seem to be one of the harder groups to identify, but also a really tough group to address and to have a relationship with.
My experience with my ex was actually a covert narcissist. And I think for me, as someone who had some knowledge of narcissism, not a lot, but some knowledge, I found it the most difficult to label him as such because it is not as obvious as a malignant narcissist. Absolutely not. It's just that grandiosity is very private. You know, my ex, for example, would say a lot that he imagined he'd be walking down the street and get discovered and, you know, be in movies and TV because he was discovered. But that was private. That was only shared with me. And so that sense that the grandiosity, all of the other traits of a narcissist he absolutely have, but it was so much more quiet and it was only shared in the relationship with me. And because it was only shared with the relationship with me, I didn't connect that dot, that connecting it to the fact that it was actually narcissism and these were narcissistic traits. I was only connecting it as his sort of private or secret dreams. You know, it was sort of easy to sort of excuse or minimize. Like, oh, you know, like we all have dreams like that, right? But honestly, I've never had that dream. I've never wanted to be famous or be a celebrity. Like that's never been a dream of mine. And I've never really thought a lot about feeling superior to other people. That's not a dream or a goal of mine.
It's funny because I'd have to say I'm probably a little higher on the narcissistic scale than you are because I have thought about some of that, but yeah, I didn't, you know, in the middle of that friendship, and this was a friendship, and I have since then met a few men that I maybe was getting to know, thinking about dating, that I now would say was covert, but it was a friendship that this happened in. And in the middle of that relationship, I never once thought to myself, this person's narcissistic. It never even crossed my mind. Because like you said, that wasn't what this individual led with. This person led with something that was really amazing and thoughtful and seemed sensitive. This is a person who serves and seemingly shows up for other people and has been in a helping career most of this individual's life. So it never crossed my mind. And I think that's what tricks a lot of people in about covert narcissism, is that it's very difficult to spot. It doesn't present as the grandiose braggart who's the life of the party. They're not people who necessarily is name dropping and everywhere. They can be super subtle. And one of the ways in which, so that let's start by defining it, because I think that's essential to understand what it is. Covert narcissism has all the same traits as other types of narcissists, but it presents almost as an inverse to the grandiose narcissist, in the sense that instead of looking for the limelight of how great I am and how special. Their specialness is usually in their martyrdom, in showing up and serving people, in the degree that they sacrifice for other people, or in the victim role. So they're either the biggest victim or they're the biggest martyr. And those two actually are quite different, because the martyr isn't the victim. They're just the people who are always doing. You could even say they're the perfect people pleaser. They're doing everything for everybody. And then they think they should be appreciated. They think they're special and have the ability to really show up, and they don't know why people then don't see it and appreciate it. And you're more likely to hear all of that, the negativity about the attention they deserve to get and they often don't get, or they deserve to get, and then they do get it. Here's an example of how it happened in this relationship. This friend was really showing up in an amazing way during my late husband's battle with cancer, during all of his hospital stays and his treatments and stuff. And she'd been talking to other people about it, particularly at a religious organization that we were both associated with. And they decided they wanted to do a spotlight on the situation. And you would think they would spotlight my late husband's battle, his cancer struggle, as well as maybe what it was like for me and the family. What they spotlighted was the way she was the perfect friend for me. So here they did this thing that they then presented at church about how great her service was. And at the time, it felt so jarring, because my life had been consumed with the care of my late husband, and she had really no insight into what it was like on a day-to-day basis for me, and what my family was suffering and the loss we were about ready to experience. And she's getting all the glory for this, while I'm about ready to go through one of the most devastating experiences of my life. And if anybody who'd been like laying themselves out, certainly was me and my family. Yeah, she was there sometimes, but she couldn't be there all the time. She wasn't there for the really horrible, hard things that I was keeping kind of private, because those are things that you just don't let other people in. It's too personal. And it's my husband's battle. It's his experience. Nobody deserves to be in that space other than me and him. So that was a great example, is that was her supply. You want to think of it that way. Her supply was the attention she was getting. In fact, when I was thinking of leaving the area after I was widowed, she said, "After all I'd done for you," is one of the things she loved to repeat. "I can't believe you do this to me after all the things I've done for you." I'm thinking, what do you mean? I never asked you to do any of that. I thought that was a gift to me, not an obligation. So you'll notice that things are transactional, just like they're transactional with the more grandiose or more overt narcissist. It's just the biggest victim or the biggest martyr, but they have all the other things. They're very envious, they're very controlling. But the other big difference between them is the other types of narcissists tend to be overtly aggressive. This group tends to be really passive aggressive. Like even that statement, "After all I've done for you." So they'll tend to get you on the backside, withhold things or threaten to pull the relationship back if you don't quite show up right. But they critique you, they're defensive, all the things that you typically expect to see, you see. But what really made it hard for me to spot this individual was, and this is the thing I hear a lot, is that they seem highly empathic. And in fact, I think sometimes people, and I don't mean to step on anyone's toes, but when people start to brag that they're a super empath, I get a little edgy, because everybody is special in their own right. There's nobody who has superpowers. So when I start to hear somebody elevate themselves like that, I get a little uncomfortable. Not to say there's anything wrong with that, but this group, I think the covert narcissist would say they're highly empathic. She would say she's super sensitive. She showed up for me. She sacrificed for me. So you can see all of that, and you think, oh, this is a person who is reciprocal in their compassion. Oh, no. It's not. It looks like it, but it's not. And there's one of the other ways we get super tripped up on this.
I think the big thing to point out just with your specific story is the action of choice. You didn't have a choice in the fact that that's what your husband was suffering and how your family had to respond to it. You didn't have a choice. If you're a good, kind human, you're going to step up and take care of your loved one who's struggling, and you're going to take care of the family who's struggling. Yet this person had no skin in the game, and they're going over and beyond. And then they're also wanting something in return, that obligation, the duty, the strings attached. With my narcissistic ex, it was a little different in that, yes, there was the passive aggressiveness, and there was definitely overt aggression, too. But again, it was all behind closed doors. What I saw a lot was always, he was very much a wallflower. Like a lot of people would sort of think he was mysterious or sort of apply these positive, good traits to him because he just really wouldn't speak up. They just always would say, oh, he's such a nice guy. He's such a blah, blah, blah. But really, that was all sort of part of his facade, is that if he just didn't say anything, then they could just assume whatever they wanted about him.
Mm-hmm.
But in private, he absolutely believed that he was better than other people, would spend a lot of time judging these other people. He often told me in our relationship together that he was better looking than me. He would say that often. And he would say it was a joke, but it really impacted my self-esteem in that relationship, that when I finally did leave that relationship and realized that I was significantly better looking than him, like I remember the first time my divorce attorney saw him, he was like, that's him? And I remember it was those moments that level of cognitive dissonance that I had in that relationship and how poor my self-esteem had gotten, is that I couldn't see myself realistically because I had been trying to see myself through his eyes, and through his eyes, no one was as great as he was. No one. He was the best. And that is how I definitely saw it. And it took me a long time to see it for what it was, because he wasn't charming. He wasn't really personable or friendly or affable or charismatic. He did not have any of those qualities. He really did seem like this kind, servicing kind of guy, but everything was a competition somehow. Like, I do so much for you. I do X and X, and keeping a scorecard, and no one could ever win against him in the scorecard, you know? So I definitely saw a lot of that in private, and it actually made it harder, I think, to not only leave that relationship, but to really see it for what it was and really get perspective on the type of abuse I'd experienced in that relationship, because it didn't have all of those overt qualities.
I agree. I think that's why people struggle so hard, is because we get in so far with this individual that we're very immersed with them. We're definitely trauma bonded to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're surprised when we discover there's these very unhealthy components to it. One of the things that was happening a lot in this relationship with me was that she was extremely controlling. It was in a really sweet way. Like, I hate to have the way you say goodbye just seems so rushed. Can we slow down? I mean, I really hate to have you say goodbye. Can we, I'd like to give you a hug, and, don't you find it painful too? And if you're hungering for a relationship, and I guess I have to back up and give you some kind of context, because it sounds like, well, Kerry, can't you see that's not very healthy? That sounds really needy. But, up to this point, I was an undiagnosed autistic woman, really socially struggling. I'd had several relationships flame out. I'd moved to an area of the country where I knew from the moment I moved there that it wasn't a fit. I couldn't find my people. I had left an area where I went graduate school where I had many relationships and really great relationships. So I was really struggling in this new area. It just was not a good fit for me, but it's where we had a job. So I'd been there for a decade or more, really lonely, and wondering what was wrong with me, because I just struggled and struggled. And then I meet this individual who seems to be so over the top and fantastic. I was desperate for a relationship. And at this point, after having relationships blow out, I was kind of open to suggestions. Now, to where I am today, after all that I've gone through, I wouldn't be, because I'm in a different place and I've chosen myself at this point. But I hadn't chosen myself at that point. I was pre all of this that happened and all the changes that happened. So when this was being said to me, it sounded sweet. I wanted somebody to like me that much, to want to have a relationship with me that much. I didn't see it as controlling, but it blinded me to a lot of the strategies that were being used that were highly manipulative. And I think that's what makes it hard for people. Let's take both types. I think there's like two types. I mean, this is just me theorizing, but as I'm really kind of standing back, the victim person is the whiner, pitiful, just doused in self-pity. Nothing ever goes right. They one up you. If you're sick, they're sicker. If you're in pain, they have more pain. If you can't make friends, no one loves them. They're going to always win. That's the competition. They're the biggest victim. The biggest martyr is more of a positive personality in the sense they're not like a sad sack Eeyore type. But on the other hand, they're always the one who's giving the most and doing the most and sacrificing the most. And they're going to always win in that category. But both group is controlling. You're going to see yourself feeling crowded out, like that you don't have a space or that you can never do enough. It just feels insatiable. There's like, even like, take that example. I couldn't say goodbye right. There's this insatiable need for me to be perfect, and I couldn't do it. No matter how much I tried, I'd still hear that I didn't do it right.
Absolutely. I can really relate. I had a friend, and my husband and I were just talking about this particular friend today, actually, because she little single white femaled me. I don't know.
What does that mean?
That's the best way to describe it. So single white female, we're thinking of the character who just sort of like takes over and starts to try to resemble the other person.
Oh, you're like literally from the movie.
Literally from the movie. Yeah.
Okay.
So this particular woman, I had become friends with her shortly after my separation, really before my separation, and she had helped me leave. And then afterward, we had bonded really closely, and she was actually a very important figure in me beginning to date and like buying clothes and makeup for the first time that like fit me and looked nice. Like she was very helpful for me in that area and really helped sort of push and increase my self-esteem. But then I started to notice that she would just criticize specific things, like criticize what I wore. Like we would meet up for coffee and she'd be like, why didn't you dress nice for me? For Christmas, she bought me a lot of jewelry. It was like very big earrings, very big necklaces. And I don't wear stuff like that. And when I would then show up afterward to see her and I wasn't wearing those items of jewelry that she had bought me, she would ask, like, why don't you wear, like, that doesn't look very good. Why aren't you wearing what I got you? And she would always often criticize my short hair. And I've had short hair since 2018. And I've always really liked it. I've had short hair. And she would criticize it all the time and say, oh, I used to have short hair. I would never have short hair again. Well, I finally ended up sort of having to push away the relationship because it really just got to be too much. She just was constantly trying to control me, making comments. She also repeatedly dated married men, which was, I didn't judge her for that, but it's not what I wanted to do with my own life. And it kind of felt like she was wanting me to do that. It kind of felt like she was wanting me to sort of chase sort of emotionally unavailable people. And that's not what I wanted. And I had met the man that I'm now married to. And I was like, this isn't for me. I'm getting a lot of pushback. They're not wanting to honor boundaries. Like, this isn't working for me. Well, years later, she popped up on my Facebook as a mutual friend. She has gotten married to a man that she'd started dating when we met. She has cut her hair. Her hair is short. She looks like me. She looks like me. And I really like looking back from that. What I see is that her criticisms all came from envy. That's what I see. And that's what I think. I mean, narcissism in general is based so much on such intense envy, such intense, like not feeling okay in and of ourselves and wanting to fit in, you know, and trying to make themselves into someone that they're not. And that's what I see for this particular friend, is someone who really wasn't okay with the fact that I was okay with me and really tried to shape and change that because that's what she was doing.
Yeah, it's eerie the way that you described that, because I started to dress like her because she wanted me to dress like her too. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that did happen. That's really, really, really bizarre that you say that. And she was trying to impact my weight. And so she was making a lot of comments about how little she ate. I actually did lose weight when I was around her just because she ate so little that I mean, she was thinner and smaller than me anyway. She wasn't as tall as me, but I ended up losing weight just because you just don't eat as much when you have somebody who's like consciously saying, look how little I eat. And you're thinking, oh yeah, okay, I have to eat less. So I ate less. I was losing weight around her. But yeah, I think the other thing that makes this relationship so hard, and you know, it has the same stages that other, believe it or not, even that romantic relationships have. It has a love bombing stage.
Absolutely.
There certainly is a devaluation, which we're both describing, where we're not quite right, and they're trying to change you and fix you. I think the discard phase, though, looks radically different, and that's where people get super surprised because they use guilt a lot more heavily and they may not be as quick to rush out into another relationship. They may just keep trying to whittle you away and work on you as they hollow you out as a person. But then when you try to leave because you get frustrated or wore out or it's too much and exhausting, they lay on a lot of guilt and a lot of accusations. They often may then threaten something, threaten you, threaten their life, again, this poor me, how could you do this to me? I thought you cared more about. So I think they do all this angling to keep you in the relationship as a way to keep you controlled. And that's where I hear a lot from people who contact me is that they'll say, I don't know how to leave because every time I try to, this person either attempts suicide or threatens suicide. Or they get sick, something goes really wrong and they're ill, or something happens in their life and they need you. So they're very good at keeping people strung along for a long time, making it really difficult to get out, really difficult. And that was true for me. I felt it gut wrenching trying to get away from this individual. It took me a long time to break free. Believe it or not, it was my narcissistic ex who helped cut it off. He said, he didn't like her. I think he suspected there is competition. And he's like, so he said, it's her or me. And so I literally cut her off. And then later I tried to connect again, but I found that it was just so out of balance that every time I reconnect, it would be all this drama about something. It was, and here's the other thing. And I forgot to mention this earlier. There's a failure to have them see your issues, really. So they just they sort of obsess on whatever's wrong in their life, but whenever there's something wrong in your life, they don't show up. And I've heard this from multiple people. It's almost like a common thing they say. I'd love to know if you heard this. So when you need something or you're in trouble, they'll say, I don't know how to show up. This is the best that I can do. I'm just not really good at that. I'm not real good at empathy. I'm not real good at compassion. You're laughing. So you heard that?
Yeah, it absolutely happened with both that friendship that I was talking about and my ex. Absolutely both the same way, that at times when I absolutely needed them, for example, with a miscarriage with my ex, he was not able to just sit with me. He was not able to sit there with me and grieve or be sad. He just had to be absent. He just had to be. He could not be there for me at that time. And my friend, who was constantly, it's funny that you mentioned that because both of these people have attempted or threatened to attempt suicide at the end of those relationships. Absolutely. It was the case with both of them.
Wow.
Both of them, or her in particular, she always had drama, always had issues. And when I absolutely needed it, she would tell me outright, I just can't. I don't have any emotional energy. I'm tapped out, things like that. She had a very high stress serving kind of job. And that was always her excuse that she would go back to of, I just don't have the space. I don't have the energy. Work's been too hard. And for whatever reason, I did not see that imbalance. I didn't see that imbalance until I was able to start stepping back from it and being able to observe it more objectively. When I was in it, I was just like, oh, I understand, because I would have moments like that too. But then I wasn't really following it through and realizing, hey, when I told her I didn't have the space or energy, she flipped out and I felt guilty and showed up even though I wasn't really able to or didn't have the time or energy for it,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. In fact, this individual had a chronic illness. It was not, it's just a chronic, frustrating illness. It's not something that's very threatening. But when she would have a bout, it would be the end of the world. And it would go on for weeks. And we're not talking like hours, we're talking weeks of this drama. And she'd want attention throughout the day to reassure her, show up for her, go to the appointments with her, whatever it was. And yet then when it turned around, now was really helpful with my late husband's cancer. But if you flip it around, if something was going wrong with me, or I was having a bad day, or even just not in a great space, she'd say, I'm just not good at that. My mother was so much better at that. I'm just not good at that. And I'm like, okay, I've been there for weeks for you with your latest health issue, and I'm having a bad day and you don't know what to say. All right. It was, the imbalance was ridiculous. Yeah, it's super common. So if that was how difficult it was to get out of those relationships, then how did you get out?
With the friendship, I was absolutely healthier than I had been with my ex. And so I was able to really see that this is really manipulative and this isn't an okay. And I really started to notice it, particularly when I started dating my now husband, is that I was building a new relationship and she was not okay with that. She started to get more possessive, more controlling, blowing up my phone over and over again. And just at that time, I'd kind of just gotten fed up. And then I started getting tons of comments about how he was awful, how he was like attacking him, and she didn't even know him. There was no reasoning for it. And so I started putting up boundaries. I was like, I'm not going to participate in conversations where you are bad mouthing my partner that you haven't met because you've chosen not to meet him,
Yeah.
you know? And she didn't like that. She would just sort of not speak to me. That would be her response, is stonewall. And then finally, I said, I need some space. I really need some space. I need some couple of days. This relationship right now isn't working for me. And when I came back after the couple of days, she just decided to ghost me. So she had gotten what she wanted or had decided to move on. When it came with my ex, I was absolutely working with someone to help me specifically in leaving a traumatically abusive relationship. And so I needed that guidance and support to help get out of that relationship, especially when I'm dealing with somebody who's threatening to kill themselves when I have 2 young children with him.
Yeah.
But I absolutely needed outside support and guidance for that relationship. I didn't have the ego strength that I had with the friendship later to leave it on my own.
Yeah. 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 It took another friend observing this, another clinician, actually, a mental health clinician, who said, this individual's got a lot of narcissistic traits. Like, oh. And then once they said that, like, okay, ding, ding, ding. Yeah, it makes sense. All this makes sense. But it's hard to see. It's hard to manage. And they're hard to get out, just like all these relationships. And they're the ones that they don't tend to leave us. We often have to leave them. And then there's all that guilt that we feel, because we're not only losing a connection that felt in the beginning like the most amazing connection we've ever had, but we're also losing a connection that's just scary. It's scary in the sense of it's intense. The intensity is so high, and the guilt that they're piling on is so much. And it just makes you feel crappy. I know I felt really, really crappy.
So, Kerry, today we've been discussing several instances where our loved one might attempt to emotionally manipulate us into staying in a relationship and or not leaving a relationship by threatening self-harm, threatening suicide, or even attempting self-harm or suicide. When that happened to me, and as the advice that I've given to clients who have dealt with the same thing, is that we are not capable of stopping someone from doing something to themselves. We don't have that power in and of ourselves. And so what I recommend all of us to do who are potentially in this space is to give it up to the authorities. And which is what I did. I called the police because I'm like, I really had to take care of children. I couldn't handle my ex threatening to do that. And I was terrified of him doing that in our home, in front of our children, anything like that. So I called the police and let the police handle that, because he clearly needed to be under watch and some kind of help or support. And if it's someone who is doing it, who is threatening it and has no intention of doing it, that can put those threats to bed. What has been your experience, or what would be your advice, Kerry?
Yeah, it's the same. I would exactly do the same thing. And I also think it's important for people to know, important for me to even remember at the time when it happens, that I'm not responsible for another person's actions.
Mm-hmm.
I can't make someone harm themselves, and I can't stop someone from harming themselves. That's just not something that's in my control. People will like to say to other people, it's your fault, or you're doing this to me,
Yep.
or you're making me do this, but that's actually not true. It's fully under their control. That's just a form of manipulation, and to see it as that. And I know that's so easy for me to say, but it's really hard for someone to experience it that way. But it is the truth. Any more than you can't make somebody eat, and you can't make somebody sleep, you can't make someone decide to live or not live. In addition to calling the police, which I think is a great idea, the other thing you can do is you can also drive them to the ER is another option. And you also could walk into a psychiatric facility if you know one in your area. Now, not everybody is near one, but I've been fortunate where I've worked for one. And and I've lived near one, so that I know that there's an intake center. You can literally just walk in and say, I'm with so-and-so and they want to hurt themselves. And then they'll take over and they'll start the assessment. And what's so nice about that is it takes it off your hands. It's no longer your decision. What happens is somebody else's decision, and you've helped. That's one of the most incredible things you could ever do, is to get people to the right service so they can actually get real treatment.
I do think we need to point out that some resources are going to be better than others. And for those of us who have fear of authorities or fear of the police, that would be a reason to consider going to the ER, going to the psych ward, going to the psychiatric center instead of reaching out to the police, because there have been plenty of instances, unfortunately, where someone with a mental health crisis experiences harm at the sake of authorities. And so that's something to take into consideration as well, is reaching out if that's not a possibility or if that's not comfortable for you. But either way, it needs to be taken out of your hands, because you're right. Like, we don't have any control over that, and we can't potentially stop it or make it happen either way. But if it's specifically being used as threats to manipulate us, it shows that we're serious, and we're not going to tolerate that if we follow through with some kind of action like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us today. Have a question or comment? Email us at hello@breakingfreewithkerryandtara.com. If this episode's been helpful, consider becoming a supporter. And if you haven't yet, make sure to follow us at Breaking Free from Narc Abuse on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. We'll see you back here next time.